My name is Haley Vale, 26 years old. I remember the sound more than the pain, the scream of metal tearing itself apart, the brakes clawing at the asphalt, and the world spinning into a blur of headlights and gravel. Then silence. Heavy, ringing silence. My cheek pressed against the cold road, the taste of iron flooding my mouth. Somewhere nearby, a car door slammed. "Take her to the cheapest ward," my father's voice cut through the ringing, calm as if he were ordering lunch. "If she dies, less money wasted." The driver stammered, "Sir, she's bleeding." "Then move faster," my father said, "just not expensively." I tried to move, to call out, but my voice was swallowed by the noise of tires retreating. For a second, I saw my mother's heels clicking toward me. She crouched just long enough to smooth her skirt. "You always bring trouble, Haley. Even the road hates you." Her perfume burned worse than the wounds. I wanted to believe I was dreaming, that no parent could sound that bored while their daughter bled. But as I drifted out again, I heard my father sigh, "You hit her, you pay. Just don't waste money on her comfort." When I woke, everything hurt in waves. My leg in a cast, my ribs wrapped tight, my throat dry like sand. The hospital smelled of bleach and exhaustion. The nurse checking my IV looked almost apologetic. "Your father signed the papers and left," she said softly. "No contact number." No one came back, no one called. 2 days later, a plastic bag appeared on the bedside table. Inside it, my torn clothes, a handful of coins, and a note written in my mother's sharp handwriting. "Don't come home until you can pay your debt." I stared at it for a long time, wondering which debt she meant. Existing? Breathing? Being the wrong daughter? A young doctor named Dr. Patel came by to check my vitals. She frowned at my chart. "You were lucky," she said. "Fractures, bruises, but no internal bleeding. You'll need a few weeks of rest." "I can't afford that," I muttered. "Your parents—" "They're not waiting for me," I interrupted. She didn't argue, just slipped a folded paper into my hand when she left, a bus route scribbled on the back. "There's a community shelter near the East Terminal," she'd written. "They take women who need a restart." I never went. 2 mornings later, I signed my own discharge papers. The nurse didn't stop me. Maybe she saw the way I looked, like someone who had already learned pain couldn't kill her. I hobbled out into the heat, my crutches squeaking against the sidewalk. Home wasn't far. It had never been far, yet every step there felt like a confession I shouldn't make. When I reached the house, the door was locked. My knock echoed too long before it opened halfway. My mother's face appeared, expression neat, voice sharp. "Oh," she said, "you survived. Guess the hospital wasn't cheap enough." Behind her, I heard my father's newspaper rustle. "You shouldn't have been walking in the road," he said without looking up. "That driver was generous to even stop." "I could have died," I whispered. He shrugged. "Would have saved everyone the trouble." I looked at them, really looked. Their clean clothes, their calm. The kind of people who'd smile at church on Sunday and whisper afterward about gratitude. My throat closed. "I just need my things." "You don't live here anymore," my father said. "We cleared your room, sold your desk to pay the water bill." Mom leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Maybe now you'll learn to be less of a burden." From the stairs, my sister Brittany called. "God, you're still milking that accident thing?" She laughed. "Drama queen." I could have screamed. Instead, I said quietly, "I won't come back." My father smiled faintly. "Good." The door shut and something inside me shut with it. That night, I sat on a park bench a few blocks away. My crutches leaned beside me, useless. Every muscle ached, but the ache felt cleaner than the shame. Across the street, the lights from our house glowed warm and unreachable. Through the window, I saw shadows moving. Dinner plates, laughter. My family, whole without me. A stray dog limped out from under a bush, one paw swollen. It stopped in front of me, uncertain, then lay down. When I reached out, it rested its head on my arm. "You're broken too, huh?" I whispered. Its tail thumped weakly. For a moment, that was enough company. Days passed like rain through rust. I found a corner store with a help wanted sign. The owner, Mr. Duncan, was a quiet man with kind eyes. He looked at my cast, then at me. "You sweep floors slow or fast?" "Slow's all I've got," I said. He nodded. "Good enough." He never asked questions, just handed me a mop and left me alone. For the first time in weeks, nobody looked at me with pity or disgust. Every morning, I passed my old house on the way to work. The curtains were drawn, the lawn neatly trimmed. I told myself it didn't hurt anymore, that I just needed to see it to remind myself what I'd escaped. But it did hurt, every time. One afternoon, my father was outside, polishing his car, the same one whose mirror still bore a faint dent from the night I was hit. The sun glinted off its hood like mockery. He saw me and froze, then sneered. "Still hanging around here?" "I walk to work this way," I said. "Maybe you'll get hit again," he muttered. "Then you'll finally learn." I didn't answer, just looked at the car, the chrome, the shine, the care. He'd never cleaned a wound of mine, but he polished that car every weekend. That night, lying on my cot at the back of the store, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling cracked like old paper. I thought of Dr. Patel's words, "You were lucky." Maybe she was right. Maybe surviving was luck, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like punishment stretched thin. Still, something inside me shifted, a small, sharp thought taking shape. I wasn't scared of dying anymore. I was scared of living under them again. They'd made me disposable. Fine. Disposable things can't be broken twice. I turned to the stray dog curled by my bed. "We'll make it," I whispered. "Just you and me." Its ears twitched like agreement. That night, for the first time since the accident, I didn't dream of pain. I dreamed of precision, clean lines, steady hands, and a plan forming in the quiet. Because survival wasn't enough anymore. I wanted something more, not revenge out of hate, something quieter, smarter. Justice. And it would start exactly where everything had ended, on the same street, under the same house that once locked me out. Morning began with keys and metal shutters, the small shriek they made when Mr. Duncan rolled them up. The stray dog, now mine and everything but paperwork, would stretch and yawn, then trot to the back door like a tiny guard with a crooked paw. I named him Atlas because he carried more than he should, and because I needed something in my life that didn't collapse when it was asked to hold weight. At the store, I learned the rhythm of ordinary mercy, coins sliding, barcodes chirping, customers who looked right through me unless they needed directions to the cheapest detergent. Mr. Duncan spoke in short sentences, the kind that didn't pry. "Stock the tea." "Breaks at 2. Sometimes he said, "You're limping worse. Sit." I would shake my head and say, "I can't afford rest," and he would pretend not to hear the rest of what I meant. I began to prefer the quiet work, slicing open boxes with a dull blade, lining labels so the rows looked like calm. There was comfort in making things face forward. When the pain flared, I counted to 8 and found a shelf that needed straightening. If grief was a stain, I would make the aisle cleaner. If memory was noise, I would lower it with the hiss of the fridge case and the soft thump of milk on metal. Sometimes, on break, I'd sit on the back step with Atlas and watch the sky. The city wasn't kind, but it was honest. It didn't applaud. It didn't boo. It kept moving. If you fell, it stepped around you and carried on. I preferred that to love with a price tag. I passed my old house every day because apparently I'm the kind of person who tests wounds to see if they've healed. The curtains stayed closed. The lawn trimmed within an inch of its life, like shame could be manicured. My father kept the car spotless even when the rest of us were a mess. That machine had better care than any of his daughters. I used to count the reflections in its hood, hedge, window, sky, like a litany. Now I counted how long it took him to notice me. Most days, he didn't. When he finally did, it was at the market up the block. I had gone in to buy rice and bandages. He was buying imported wine, the kind you brag about and then drink alone. He stood at the register arguing over a $10 difference, and when he glanced sideways, I saw the moment my existence irritated him like a fly he hadn't expected indoors. "Charity work?" he said, eyes flicking to my apron. "I'm working," I answered. He leaned closer as if common sense was a secret. "Working? You? The girl who cost me a fortune?" "You didn't pay," I said. I didn't say it loud. Truth doesn't need volume. His mouth curled. "Still my fault you got hit? Still my fault you exist? You never change." I looked at the bottles in his basket. Some things don't either. I left before he could spit another sentence. For the rest of my shift, I stacked bread and thought about how some people can only feel power if someone else is smaller. Mr. Duncan started letting me work the register. "You don't flinch when people get rude," he said, as though he were noticing a rare trait. "Patience looks good on you." Patience didn't feel good on me. It itched. But it was useful, and usefulness was the only way to outlive humiliation. At night, I practiced stillness like a muscle. I listened to the hum of the store's old refrigerator and learned to match my breathing to it. When pain tugged at my leg, I reminded myself, metal bends and remembers pressure. Bones do too. People, most of all. Weeks passed. The limp softened. I saved enough to rent the one-room apartment behind the store, a narrow space with a window that opened like a stubborn mouth. I bought a cheap hot plate and 2 bowls from the discount rack. Atlas slept in a crate with a blanket that smelled like cinnamon. Mr. Duncan gave it to me after a shipment of holiday candles arrived early. When I paid rent on time the second month, I put the receipt on the wall. Evidence. Not to show anyone, just to see. I ran into Brittany at a cafe across from the shop, laughter peeling off her like perfume. She wore a purse that could have paid my rent 3 times. When she saw me, she waved with the delighted malice of a child pointing out a stain. "Oh my God," she said, loud enough so the table heard. "You still alive?" "Barely," I said, because sometimes humor is armor and sometimes it's a blade. She stood, leaned in. "You know what Dad says? You were born unlucky. You attract accidents." I said, "Then being near you is dangerous." Her face pinched. "You think you're better than us now?" "No," I answered. "I just don't think about you at all." I walked away with my hands steady and my heart scraped raw, the 2 states often arriving together. Back in the store, I counted the cash drawer twice and promised myself I wouldn't spend the night replaying it. Promises like that are never kept, but they still help. The 3rd month, Mr. Duncan said, "You should try the register full-time. You have a head for details." He handed me a small ledger. "Balance this whenever you can. Numbers tell the truth quicker than people." I took the ledger home and copied its neat columns into a notebook. I found peace in subtraction, in the way loss could be named and survived. By then, customers had started greeting me by name. The older ones told me their secrets in the produce aisle: a husband who didn't speak, a grandson who did drugs, a memory that kept going missing. I didn't fix anything. I just rang up apples and listened. It felt like being human again. On certain mornings, though, I'd wake with a foulness under my ribs, the old house stuck in my throat like something unswallowed. I'd put on my shoes and walk the long way to work, the way that went past the lopsided sycamore and the bus stop with the faded bench, and yes, the driveway with the unblinking car. I memorized its new scratches as if they were dates on a calendar. When the sun hit the windshield, it flashed like a camera, and I thought about evidence again, of who they were, of who I refused to be. I told myself I wasn't plotting, that planning was an uglier word for what I was doing, waiting. But waiting changes you. It trims your voice and thickens your skin. It turns rage into something a person can hold without setting the room on fire. So when the day finally arrived, I recognized it by the sound of my name said wrong. "Haley," my mother called from the store's doorway, emphasis on the second syllable as if, like always, she could press me into someone else with pronunciation. Her lipstick was smudged, hair scraped back, blouse buttoned unevenly. She looked like she'd been running and was furious with the effort. Mr. Duncan glanced up from the back counter, then disappeared into his office with a tact that felt like kindness. Atlas lifted his head in the crate, ears pitched toward the tremor in her voice. I put the last stack of canned soup on the shelf. "We're open in 5 minutes," I said, not turning fully, giving her a chance to be a customer instead of a ghost. She stepped closer. Up close, her face looked thinner, the careful grooming gone soft at the edges. "Your father had an accident," she said. The words were too rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in the car and hoped they would not crack. I kept my hands on the cans. "He's always had accidents," I replied, the sentence coming out flatter than I meant. I thought of the car, the mirror, dent like a bruise that refused to fade, the way his mouth had tightened when I didn't flinch at his insults. "This is different," she whispered, then louder because she believed volume could make truth. "He crashed the car. Insurance won't cover it." She moved closer, lowering her voice as if shame were a person she didn't want to overhear. "We need help." A laugh rose in me, like a cough I held back. "Help," I repeated, tasting the syllable as if it were a foreign fruit. "You have savings, right?" She looked around at the modest aisles as if the answer might be written on the discount cereal. "For all we did for you," her voice cracked on did, making it sound like didn't. I turned finally, careful, as if the floor might tilt. For a strange moment, I saw her younger, less brittle, more human, standing in a kitchen asking a boy if she wanted tea and then swallowing the question because the boy had a more interesting sister. I felt pity move in me, and then sit down, well-behaved and brief. You told me not to come home until I could pay my debt, I said. I did. I spent it on breathing. Her eyes flashed. Confusion first, then the sharper feeling she preferred. How dare you talk to me like that? We're your parents. Were, I said. She blinked as if the past tense were a slap. He's hurt, Haley. The shelf of cans behind me gleamed in their tidy formation. I thought of numbers in the ledger, of columns that must equal, of what it costs to keep a person standing. I thought of Dr. Patel's bus route, of the note that told me survival was a bill I owed, and of how I paid it, line by line, without them. Then take him, I said softly, to the cheapest ward. For the first time in my life, she didn't have a prepared face. Her mouth opened and stayed that way, not as theater, but because silence had finally walked into our house and found a chair. I adjusted the cans until their labels were aligned. The front door chimed as a customer entered early and then left, startled by the stalled air. My mother took one step back, then another, like a tide that had discovered its limit. She looked at me as if I were a stranger she'd once seen in a photo. Then she turned and went out into a morning that was too bright for what she carried. I stood still long after the bell stopped ringing. Atlas whined once, low, and I realized my hands were shaking, not with triumph, not with rage, but with the steadying that comes after a fall you finally stop bracing for. I smoothed my apron and inhaled the ordinary scent of coffee, cardboard, lemon cleaner. Outside, the street returned to its rhythm. Inside, I began counting again, not to 8 this time, but to however long it takes for a person to lay a burden down and decide not to pick it back up. They came back 2 days later. I should have expected it, but expectation is a muscle that stiffens when you stop using it. The door chime rattled at noon, and I looked up from the register to see my mother first, her smile trembling like a leaf that doesn't know if it wants to stay or fall. Behind her, my father limped in on crutches. His neck was wrapped in a brace, his eyes sunken into hollows that looked freshly carved. For a second, I didn't recognize him, not because his body was broken, but because his pride wasn't standing guard anymore. Haley, he said, my name dragging across his tongue like it hurt to say. We came to talk. I didn't move. You're blocking the aisle. He stopped halfway, shifting his weight on the crutches. My mother's hands fluttered, as if she could smooth the air into forgiveness. Please, she said. We lost everything. The repairs, the bills. Your sister moved out. She says we're cursed. The corners of my mouth twitched. Cursed, I echoed. Or maybe just collecting the interest on your choices. Mr. Duncan peeked out from the office, took one look at their faces, and slipped back in. He didn't need to hear words to understand what this was. My father leaned on the counter, close enough that I could smell the sour mix of medicine and regret. You can't keep holding grudges. We're family. I met his eyes. Family, I repeated quietly. You told a man not to waste money saving me. You called me a burden while I was still bleeding on the road. You sold my desk to pay a water bill. Which part of that sounds like family to you? His jaw clenched, the old rhythm of anger trying to find its beat. You're exaggerating. We were just scared, my mother whispered. We didn't mean... Scared of what? I asked. That I'd survive long enough to remember it? The question hung there, heavier than anything else in the room. For once, neither of them had an answer. Their silence was almost kind. I took a breath, slow and deliberate, the way you do when you're finally steady enough to stop shaking. You should leave. My mother's lip trembled. Please, Haley, we don't have anyone else. I looked down at the register drawer, at the lined bills and neatly counted coins. Then I guess you'll learn what alone feels like. For a moment, I saw my reflection in her eyes. The daughter she thought she could mold. The one she mistook for endless forgiveness. That girl was gone. I didn't feel cruel saying it. I felt honest. They stood there longer than I expected, the way people linger at a grave when they realize there won't be resurrection. Then my father's breathing hitched. He turned toward the door, slow and awkward, his crutches tapping like punctuation marks on the tile. The bell jingled once, and the sound felt like the end of a chapter I hadn't realized was still open. When they left, I sat down behind the counter. The room was too quiet, as if the air itself had witnessed something sacred and didn't want to speak about it. Atlas patted over, pressing his head against my knee. I rubbed his ear absently. It's done, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I meant forgiveness or finality. Weeks passed. The store grew busier. Mr. Duncan offered me a full-time position, and later a raise. You keep the books balanced. You keep the peace. That's worth more than you think, he said. He didn't ask about my parents, and I didn't volunteer the story. Some histories deserve to stay unlisted. At night, in my small apartment, I started taking online classes: accounting, business management, anything that would help me build something that couldn't be taken away. I learned to make coffee strong enough to taste like ambition and to fall asleep without checking for ghosts. The world outside my window felt wider than it used to, still indifferent, but finally mine. Then one evening, the phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something in me, a reflex, or maybe old habit, answered. Ms. Vale? The voice was gentle, professional. This is Nurse Harriet from St. Mary's Public Hospital. Are you related to a Mr. and Mrs. Vale? The name caught me off guard. I hadn't heard it spoken together in months. Not anymore, I said automatically. I'm sorry, she continued carefully. They were listed as next of kin on each other's charts. There's been an incident. For a moment, all I heard was the hum of the fridge and Atlas shifting in his crate. What kind of incident? An electrical fire, she said. They're stable now, but... I stopped listening halfway through. Stable. Of course they were. They'd always found a way to survive disasters they created. Thank you for calling, I said, then hung up before she could say more. I sat there for a long time, the phone heavy in my hand. I waited for tears or guilt or anything familiar to rise, but nothing did. The silence inside me was clean, uncluttered. I looked around my tiny apartment, the stacked books, the framed receipt, the bowl of water for Atlas, and realized this was the first place in my life that felt earned. I didn't visit them, didn't send flowers, didn't tell anyone. Some endings don't need an audience. A month later, I walked past the old house one last time. The yard was overgrown, the mailbox hanging by a single screw. Weeds had claimed the flower beds, turning them into small jungles. The car, their beloved car, sat crumpled in the driveway, rust crawling over its surface like regret finding a home. I stopped at the gate. The wind smelled faintly of dust and burnt oil. For a moment, I saw flashes of old nights, the glow of dinner light behind the curtains, my sister's laughter spilling down the stairs, my father's voice rising in that measured tone of disappointment. The ghosts weren't angry anymore, just tired. I left an envelope on the porch. Inside was a hospital receipt, folded once, no note, paid in full. As I turned to leave, I didn't look back. Some things only heal when you stop checking if they have. The night air brushed against my face, cold, clean, honest. I took a deep breath and felt it settle where pain used to live. Atlas tugged at the leash, eager to move forward. I smiled. All right, boy, I said. We're done here. We walked away slowly, my limp lighter than before. The street lamps hummed, and for the first time since the accident, the city didn't feel like an enemy. They had taken everything they could, my home, my name, my softness, but not my peace. And that, I realized, was the kind of revenge they'd never understand.